I've always sort of told people that I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, which is obviously evidenced by the fact that I've done like 5 million things and I still don't know. I don't have a dream job. I've never had a dream job. But what I was super clear about was the fact that I wanted to be in spaces where I could pretty much learn forever and feel like a lot of joy in whatever I was doing. And so when I had this revelation, I was 14. And the first people I told about this were my two very serious academic parents who were obviously unnerved by this because they were like, I mean, you have to get a job. And not unnerved necessarily because they were the type of people who were like, you know, you must be a doctor, you must be an engineer, although shout out to my sister for doing that and making me look bad. But mostly because this declaration kind of happened at a time where I was like exclusively wearing My Chemical Romance t-shirts. I was only listening to System of a Down, and my favorite sentences at the time was, you just don't get me. So it kind of just sounded like the ramblings of somebody who was going through something, an angsty teenager. I'm still an angsty teenager. So I tried again at university to kind of explain this concept of like being a human being rather than being a human doing. And my sort of sisterhood of stoner friends at the time were like, cool, we get it, we're like into it, whatever. But I found that what ended up happening still was we were just discussing like what we were going to be when we grew up, you know, what kind of job we were going to have, where we were going to live, how much money we were going to make. And while that's all okay, it still felt like I couldn't do this thing that I wanted to do and do it in the way that I wanted to do it. So what I did instead was to try and carve out a sort of sanctuary or sanctuaries of creative spaces in the midst of a lot of chaos going on. And I mean, to be fair, as you can see from my aesthetic and all the bling Kanye West vibes there, I'm definitely not like an all hemp wearing, you know, Bob Dylan listening type, although I am a vegan. And because I'm a vegan, I have to tell you I'm a vegan, because that's apparently how this works. It's like the opposite of Fight Club. I got my sort of 5 matric distinctions, you know, graduated with distinction, got these 2 amazing scholarships from Media 24 and the Mellon Foundation. And as the literature on me that I had to put together, that was a weird experience, will tell you, yeah, I mean, I've had a really dope, cool career, especially considering the fact that I'm only 24. Can you guys hear me at the back? Apparently not. Okay, so basically it's about carving the space of creativity out of a lot of chaos. So in his lecture entitled The Artist's Struggle for Integrity, writer and just general light of the world, James Baldwin, is really clear on the subject of what we can expect between creativity and chaos. And he says that all safety is an illusion. Recently on the Ezra Klein podcast, which I really, really love, Michael Pollan, who's an author and really interested in neuroscience and psychedelics and hallucinogens, says that basically our sober reality is just a controlled hallucination. So we get to kind of pick the world that we think we can best live in and thrive in. Of course, there's all kinds of socio-political issues with that kind of statement, but I mean, it's not about my masters today. And of course, superstar singer and activist Nina Simone, who was then referenced in P. Diddy's recent documentary, says that all freedom is living without fear. And that's kind of important for me because even though I'm not as half as smart or prolific or famous or interesting as these people, what I was able to do in reading and kind of engaging with things like this was figure out that that's how I wanted to live. I wanted to live in a space where I was comfortable with the fact that all safety was an illusion. And so I've kind of been like led by this kind of spirit voice that tells me to kind of get up and stand up and do things the way that I want to, even in the midst of chaos. And that's really why chaos for me is a really interesting concept. So if you've ever watched a cartoon, and it would be kind of weird at this stage, given your age if you hadn't, I'm sure you're all familiar with this trope of this really happy bird that's either sitting on a windowsill or trapped in a cage, and it's just having a great time. It's like flapping and preening and just vibing around. And it's basically, to me, the image of what creative bliss feels like, just doing your damn thing. And then that's, of course, until the pesky neighborhood cat comes around, sweeps up the little bird and eats it up. And for me, that cat called chaos has had many names at different points in my career. when I first started working as a journalist, which I was 21 at the time, at City Press, I kind of felt like, okay, it's cool, I have this degree that says I can do this thing, but can I actually do it? How am I going to break it to them that even though I'm a journalist, I don't like talking to strangers? Love an email interview. Working on it, but love an email interview. And also just this feeling of like, would I fit in? Would people like me? Would I be able to do the kind of work that really, made sense to me? And at other times in my career, it's just having taken on too much work, having this plate so full of freelance stuff that I was completely like sort of dying under the weight of it. There was a point where I had like a massive vitamin D deficiency because I would go to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, leave at 12 a.m. and never see the sun. So I literally was like vitamin D deficient. I was seeing my family less and less. Everything that I could talk about was like work stuff. I was just a boring person to be around. And kind of what I took from that is that kind of energy was not working for me. But I kind of got to a point where I figured that this chaos is endemic to the kind of creative work that I do and that many of you do. So I needed to try to figure out a way to work with chaos rather than against it. This is where the bin-winning guide to chaos and creativity comes in. So some disclaimers before I tell you the 3 points. It's obviously not a foolproof guide, but if it makes a lot of sense and you want to pass it off as your own work, I will find you because I'm very good at the internet. And also, like, not all of this is necessarily good or perfect advice. I mean, I still drink a lot of vodka and yell at soccer games to cope, but I mean, I'm in therapy for that. And thirdly, I think, and I have to tell people this a lot because people do this, like I didn't give myself this nickname, like sometimes I'm been losing, but most days I hope I've been winning. And I think the last thing to say is like, I mean, I'd kind of written this very like stiff 2007 like old dude TED talk initially, and then I saw a picture of Bonang wearing a t-shirt that said give the people what they want. So this might be a little bit unconventional and have some like weird metaphors, but I'm just hoping that you're going to go with me and stick with me, and if it feels a little bit like church testify, cool, that's what I'm going for. Okay. So without further ado, let's get into these 3 points. And the first one, shocker, is be yourself. And what I literally do not mean about that is kind of, you know those high school like movies where there's that kooky kid who's like marginalized by society but knows that they're super special. That's not what I mean. I mean, Zooey Deschanel ruined that for everybody. What I am saying is that in the midst of a lot of chaos that will happen, especially if you work as a freelancer, it's to kind of feel like you should show up with everything that you are and not apologize for any of it. So often I think young creatives, and especially young black creatives, kind of feel like, you know, they have to hide the growing parts of themselves. They have to hide the parts of themselves that are like really difficult to manage because they have to come across as polished. They have to come across as if they've got it together. And what I realized, especially working in the advertising space, which, you know, according to my degree, I'm actually not qualified to do, but it seems to be going well, is that I kind of, just got to a point where I was like, I'm not going to do this polished princess thing. I'm going to be my weird person self. And inevitably, there are going to be other people that connect with that. So Mike Sharman, who was my boss at Retroviral, I mean, I think he looked at my CV, but we kind of just had a coffee meeting once. We kind of got each other's energy. And that's sometimes what happens, is that people look past the obvious stuff on paper. They see the chaotic mess that is your life. I mean, at that point, I was like at Kitcheners every Friday, and I was just a disaster. But they figure that there's something that you can do that only you can do, and there are going to be other people who kind of lock into that and believe that your chaos is the chaos that they want in their spaces. So it's just about, I suppose, packaging and selling what you do best. So, and what I'm saying in terms of that, in terms of black creatives in particular, which is, you know, for me, really important for obvious and non-obvious reasons, is that I think for black creatives, one of two things happens, is that you either are in spaces where you feel like you have to be so quiet because you mustn't mess with the status quo, and I think that our creative industries in this country still have a lot of work to do to figure out where the space of black creatives is. or you come in, as I have in previous jobs, you come in so hot so that people can see that you're there and that you have value. And so to quote two great Black heroes, James Baldwin, again, yes, I'm obsessed, and Maya Angelou, I think that when trying to like manage that chaos in terms of creativity, I try to remind myself like of two things, which is the first thing is that your crown has been paid for in full. And the second thing is to remember that in every room that you're in, you come in as one, but you stand as 10,000. And that's important for me because I find that when my voice is shaking, like it is a little bit now, or when the cursor is flickering at me for hours and hours and hours and I have nothing to write, I have to remind myself that the self that I'm bringing to the table is everything I've ever achieved, everything I've failed at, everything that I'm connected to, the things that I hate, the people that I hate, the things that I love, that kind of vibe. And the best remedy for me and the best defense against this kind of war of chaos that we all kind of live in this moment is to remember to go back to that place where I'm learning forever and trying to be in a space of deep joy. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what makes us the creatives that we are, is that ability to kind of deal with that. And the second thing, and maybe this is, it seems obvious, but it wasn't to me, is that you don't have to be unhappy. I think in the midst of all the chaos that we live in and the kinds of busy lives that we lead, what so often happens is that people think you have to be suffering to get to that other side of the creative opening, and I just don't think that that's a thing anymore. So yes, there's an immense amount of work that goes into creative, production or whatever it is that you're doing. Yes, there's an immense amount of sacrifice, long hours, but I think it's also getting to a point where your rejuvenation, your rest, your self-care, which is the word of the year, I think, is placed on equal stature as that, so that you don't get lost in the chaos. The chaos that you have instead is the kind of chaos that feeds better creative work instead of wrecking the work and you in that process. So what I'm not saying at the same time is disappear for 3 weeks from your job and be on holiday and give people a fake name. I once went on holiday and I'm not going to tell you that story. That's weird. But what I'm saying is that I suppose we have to clear up space where a creative life doesn't have to mean a life of suffering. And frankly, your everyday job also just doesn't have to be where creativity happens. There are seasons in my life, certainly, where stability was the priority. It was important for me to, especially as a freelancer, be able to pay my rent and put food on the table. So I'm not from the school of thought that says, just live however you want to live and the rest will happen. That's not a thing, especially in a country like South Africa. But as I say, I think it's the ability to live and work in creative spaces that are chaotic, but also set boundaries that mean that your happiness is protected. So particularly for young people going into these industries, it's to know that it's actually not okay for your boss to text you at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night and expect a reply. It's not okay for people to send you an email that says, can you just quickly do this, but where's the CE babes? Who's paying for this just quickly? That's what I want to know, And it's also not okay to be in this space where we constantly go, if I do this work, which is killing my soul and my creativity, more jobs will come. So it is kind of that balance between taking on the chaos of trying to do all these millions of things, but even from the list of websites that Ross has read out to you, I didn't enjoy all of those, and I had to kind of step away and say, that's not for me. So that's sort of really important. And there's two books within that have been really helpful for me. And one is Greg McKeown's Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And the other is Miss Oprah Winfrey's What I Know for Sure. And so from McKeown, I kind of realized that boundaries were really important, and that in the midst of the chaos of creative life, that if you don't set priorities for yourself, other people set them for you. And from Oprah Winfrey, and I didn't know that you could know things for sure, but I guess she does because she's Oprah. And of course, she's a billionaire, so it's a lot easier to just say these things. But I mean, we all, I guess, hoping to be billionaires, at least I am. I kind of learned from this really brutal lesson that she has in this book that nobody's responsible for your happiness. Your job, the boss of your job is not the job of your boss rather is not to make sure that you are comfortable and that you are thriving. Obviously, it's amazing when that happens, and I've been very lucky that that's been the case. But sometimes you're going to be in environments that are so obviously harmful and so obviously chaotic, and it is down to you to say, that's it, my creativity will not survive this. So no, I don't believe that creativity means you have to suffer at the altar of public opinion. The other thing that I'm learning as something of a, and I hate this term so much, schminfluencer, so I'm going to call it that because I don't like saying influencer, is that in as much as it's very cool to put out your work and get likes and shares and comments and have people want you to speak at things, that also can become a really chaotic space in the sense that effectively what you're taking on is an extra career in managing other people's feelings about you and your work. So in as much as I love an Instagram story, and you're all going to be in the selfie at the end of this thing, it also cannot be the thing that drives why you do what you do. And it should matter that the work is good, even if no one sees it and recognizes it. Because I think we are moving definitely in the social media space to a place where there's just a chaotic drive for hypervisibility and less of a drive to make real impact. So that's something that I'm sort of trying to work away from. And I find that increasingly as I've slowed down with the Instagram and slowed down with the Twitter, and I don't actually care if anyone retweets my stuff, although I find that people retweet like the messiest things I say, and I was hoping that would slip through the cracks. I think it's just getting to a point where managing the kind of chaos that actually feeds what you're trying to do rather than anything else. So I think basically what I'm saying in terms of not having to be unhappy is that you got to pick your lane and kind of defend it. So chaos is going to happen, but boundaries are going to be where you learn, and joy is going to be the thing that continues to drive you. And then the third thing is jump into the fog. So as I said before, I'm a recovering angsty emo teen. So this one comes from one of my favorite British bands, the Wombats. And in their song, they say, jump into the fog in the hope that we hit the ground upright. And the reality check is that we're not cats. You probably won't land on your feet. You're probably going to crash and burn sometimes. And there's going to be people that don't dig what you do. And I'm kind of cool with that. But most of the work that we actually tend to admire out of the best creatives working today is the stuff that is a shot in the dark. It's a stab at something new. It's trying to figure out something, scratching for something, thinking through something, planning through something to get at it. The creative work, of course, that we see on the other side is the polished version. It's the front of the tapestry. But no one ever thinks about how much chaos is happening on the other side, or the loose strings that are kind of pulling it together. So basically what my advice there is just to jump. Like I've had times where I was in a job for less than a year, and I mean, again, I tell you, my parents are academics. Like they've had between them 50 years of experience in what they do and really consistent at it. And I was like sitting there going, oh my God, you can't leave a job before a year is over, even if hating it, because you're meant to just stay here. You're meant to just push through the hard stuff. And that's really not it for me. So if I don't dig something that much anymore, and I'm lucky that people want to fund me doing cool research, then I just jump into the next thing. And what I mean by that is also an educated jump. I'm not saying just quit your job because you don't like what coffee they have there. That's also ridiculous. But I think it's constantly not being afraid of what can go wrong, because of course, especially as younger creatives, you're in a lot of situations where you're dealing with clients or you're dealing with other people that have more money than you and they have more power than you and all of these things. And that's cool. That's great for them that they're like corporate moguls. But there's a reason that you got a gap, you got a space to speak to your own power, to speak against existing power, to speak your creativity and your truth. And the only sort of thing that you need to do is kind of just jump, I guess. I mean, I watched Nick Haralambos talking about his 12 failed startups. We've all heard the story that Ava DuVernay got her first directing break in her 40s. We all heard the story that Barbara Streisand was too old or too ugly to do show business. And I mean, those people could have kind of just decided this is all getting too chaotic, I'm over it. But they decided to jump anyway, and they decided to keep striving for the thing that they wanted to do. So I guess if you're in a space that feels too chaotic where your creativity can't show through. It's about getting past the shiver and the quiver, as I call it, before a meeting, and then just spitting the fuck out what you want to say. So I guess those feelings of not wanting to jump are, again, that cat on the window. The sense that it's going to snatch you up, it's going to eat you because you hesitated when you were actually meant to make the choice to fly. So basically my point under there is just to say, jump into the fog, and your work and your worth is always going to be enough to help you hit the ground upright. What I'm realizing and resisting, because I'm an anxious person, is that the work of creativity is always going to be messy. I try to go to corporate. I worked in a property investment firm for like a hot minute, and then I was like, yeah, no, it's not, this is not going to work. So it is, I suppose, to steal from Gary Zukav's The Seat of the Soul, the commitment to living in a constantly multi-sensory space where you're always searching, you're always learning, you're always in a dynamic space where things are going wrong, but every once in a while you do a piece of work and you know it was right and you know it feels good, and that's totally worth it. So for someone who struggles with anxiety, I think for me, the cat on the window and the chaos is the public nature of the work that I do. I'm not somebody who really likes to like be there and be like, yeah, look at my stuff, look how cool I am. I mean, no one really cares that you are like, your title is a creative. What people care about is whether you're able to sustain that creativity. And so I suppose what I have to also say is I'm kind of immensely proud of the work that I've been able to do so far with City Press. Being able to turn my like love for everyday fashion into a job, which was really cool, and obviously not modeling, duh. And sort of when I started working at Retroviral with Mike Sharman, being able to be very raw and chaotic and all over the place and a little bit unhinged, but getting to a place where that could be polished into something that actually had worth and that people were responding really well to, and that felt really good for me. So my cat on the window has effectively been tamed. So I suppose the takeaway of what I'm trying to say here is, instead of chaos being a master, instead of chaos being some kind of creative murderer, it needs to start to be the kind of companion that you want, because it's going to happen. Instead of my creative murderer, chaos is now an eternal ticking clock that kind of says, let's move on to the next thing. So when I feel like my diary is too full, when I feel like there's just too much, I try and take a step back and go back to those 3 points, which is to remember to be myself, to remember that I don't have to be unhappy, and to remember, even when I'm shaking at the end of the plank of a new creative project, to just jump right into the fog. So I hope that was helpful, and thank you for listening to me.
How do you balance, so you writing a thesis, you're taking freelance work on, you're contributing to the bar, you're still writing articles. How do you kind of balance all of that, and how do you make sure that you're delivering the quality that you want to deliver?
I don't know if I am balancing it. I think that like I kind of got to a point where I was like, when I have too few things on my desk, I get nervous. But when I feel like there's that constant momentum, then it's a lot better for me. But the other thing that I try and do is, it was really hard for me going back into academics after having been in a 9-to-5 job, because your timetable is so flexible. So what I try and do is I work 8 to 5 as if it was a regular job, and then I don't do anything in the evening, and then I'll maybe work a Saturday morning, but other than that, I don't do that. And I also feel like, and I've been really angry on Twitter and Instagram about this lately, is because I have a lot of like communication anxieties, is I think that people need to be a little bit more careful about just sending people a text because you're panicked, like, oh, this thing needs to happen, so let me just send people text. So I try not to text for work stuff, I just keep it on email. Otherwise that line between your personal life and your professional life just gets super blurred. But no, there's no balance. I'm a Libra, but there's no balance. But that's how I've chosen to live my life, is to know that I'm never going to have that kind of like Zen perfect life. I'm just going to have to work with what I've got. Yeah.
So you work with Nicola.
Yes.
She's fantastic.
She is.
She told me you can be very ballsy in the presentation at agencies. Will
Yes.
you find your bravery to speak about maybe things that could be a bit sensitive but you know is right in those sort of spaces where you need to present maybe a trend insight to a room that doesn't understand what's going on?
Okay. My parents are very like intense people, like very like when I was a little kid, like we would watch the news, so they were like those kinds of parents. I'm also half Nigerian, which I think comes with a kind of certain level of brashness that I kind of enjoy. And also, like, frankly, I just don't give a fuck whether people don't like me. I'm like, if you're paying me money and you trust that I'm qualified to tell you this thing, then you don't want to hear that thing, then I haven't done my job. Also, for me, in a space, and I said this, you know, in the talk in terms of being like, somebody who, as a young black woman, has been lucky enough to be in spaces where I can actually affect the kinds of products people are making or the way they're packaging it. If I'm the only person in the room, there's a huge responsibility to make sure that people like me don't get forgotten or people like me don't get misrepresented. It concerns me extremely that we are still in a situation where you'll watch, like, have you seen those washing powder ads? And the white family does the ad and it's in a washing machine, and then the black family, it's like hand washing. Which, I mean, I'm sure they did some research that helped them come to that conclusion. But then why is the black woman dancing for washing powder? Why is she dancing for chicken? Why are we singing for petrol? Like, you know what I mean? So if I'm in a room and I can stop another misrepresentation from happening, I kind of feel like I'm kind of responsible for doing that. Maybe I'll become more mellow when I turn 25 next month. But at this point, yeah, no, whatever. It's like I take it or leave it. And some people do leave it and they don't want to continue to work, and I'm cool with that. Like, I'm totally cool with that. Yeah.
So you are only 24, almost 25, and you've done so much already. What kind of goals have you set for yourself for the near and longer term future?
At this point, I just really want to finish my thesis. That's like no, I think, and so I was actually talking to somebody about this earlier today. I think I was very lucky that I was able to do a lot of creative and fun, interesting work. But I think that what I'm realizing is also the spaces that need these kinds of interventions and representation are more corporate, are more serious, are more non-governmental. So I wouldn't say that I have any goals at this point except just to finish the thesis, because that's as far as I can see right now. But it's definitely to think about moving into career spaces that potentially are a little bit more serious and a little less fun, but where I can take what I've learned in the sort of creative space over into that and really make, like, you know, I have a lot of social justice concerns that I don't think I've addressed adequately in my work so far. So I think after the masters, it's really about packaging work that is not just beautiful and interesting, but actually can affect people's lives. Yeah.
You have been involved in a lot of different things, and so that means that you have been in the process of making something what it needs to be, but haven't reached it yet. So you're in the busy doing process. How do you handle people when they inquire about whatever you're doing, while it's still not done yet, while it's still not this cool thing yet, it's still just an idea, it's still just growing? How do you handle people when they ask about that? 'Cause that's something I struggle with.
I try and say as little as possible. What I'm also realizing is there's like the tendency, and this can happen and it does happen, where like really well-meaning creatives have an idea, but they have not thought about the execution of it. And then they're all over town on the gram and on Twitter being like, I'm doing this new cool thing, and then it never materializes. And the kind of disappointment of not only yourself, but everybody watching you really does take its toll. So I try and say as little as possible, and I'll say, when I'm comfortable with where it's at, then I'll tell you about it. Or it's just to be very honest, to say that this is what I hope it will be, this is where it's at right now, and I need the creative space and quiet to be able to take it to that next level. So it's not a great answer, people don't like that, but I mean, rather see it when it's done and it's dope than like some half-baked thing, you know?
Maybe just one amazing fun project that you worked on that really stands out for you.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this because it never actually materialized, so that does speak to that point. Before I moved to Retroviral, I was head of social media at another agency. I'd done like a couple of strategies, and I'd never done strategy properly. And the first project we worked on was a project for My Way. Never fully materialized, but what I'll tell you, and this is why it was my favorite, is that it was the first time that I could see that there are different types of creative. So I always thought creative people were like those, like, you know, like super like weird, kooky, and I was like, I'm not creative. Like, I just like to read books and shit. And then when I started working as a creative strategist, I realized that being able to package ideas in ways that are effective and are engaging is as important as having the ideas to begin with. So it was the first time I could actually see a systematic flow of what something could look like. And I think any project where you're able to take, you know, you're almost like having this scientific sublimation thing of it's complete vapor. It doesn't exist. And somehow through your tiny little brain and the people that you work with, it becomes this solid thing that lives in the world. Any kind of project where that happens for me is really amazing, where it's just in my head and then it's a real thing. And I'm like, I've never had a child, but I imagine it's like, oh, this is what my kid will look like. And then they're there and is that exciting, Ross?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...